Greetings. Hi, everybody. Hi, Bill.
Good evening. Are we on?
It seems that we're on. I got a nod from the back. So,
Love them. Love those sound people.
happy. I don't know if that's a late April Fool's joke or like, haha, joke's on you. Nobody can hear you. Ha ha. or,
Oh, I'm listening to the audience.
it was stormy this morning. We survived, though. Now the sun is shining. Tank is clean.
Did not know anything about the storm until
I got a
saw
text
the
message.
damage.
I got a text message this morning.
Of course you did. I got one that said, "Be safe." Okay. But
Yeah. I guess
where are we tonight?
We're in finishing up Matthew 22. We're going to get into Matthew 23. Real quick conversation, catch up of where we were last week, how we wrapped up last week. Last week was kind of interesting because we talked through a story that in the Jewish tradition would have had a very specific structure. What was a common refrain, a common rabbinical teaching structure? They would introduce three people, right?
Yeah.
They'd set up this whole scenario,
Well,
and then along comes a priest,
oh, the priest,
and then along comes a
Levite, stranger.
Pharisee.
Stranger. Well, okay.
So
in the normal story,
in the normal story, they
say,
would say, yeah, it would be, well, this is how everything is set up, and along comes a priest. And is the priest going to do the right thing, wrong thing?
90% of the time, he'll do the wrong thing.
He's going to do the wrong thing.
In this story scenario, that's how
Yes.
they set it up.
Yeah, they're going to do the whole backstory, and they're going to be along came a priest, and everybody's like,
yeah, we know.
well, whatever he does is going to be wrong. Yeah. And then along comes a Levite.
Right.
Still going to do it wrong.
Well, to show give evidence, Levite is a man that worked in the temple.
Right.
Like the janitor or the electrician or whatever.
Yes.
He had a job, but it was only in the temple, and that's all he concerned about.
That's what they cared for, yeah.
Right.
And so the Levite is going to do it wrong, but for a different reason.
Yeah, well, it's not his job.
Right. And then along comes a Pharisee, and a Pharisee is going to tell us what's right.
Yes.
Show us what's right.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Jesus' story?
No.
Jesus' story is along comes. Now, where does Jesus' story happen? Do you remember?
It's
on a road.
It's on a road. It's traveling from Jericho to Jerusalem.
Yes.
This is the man and we know he's traveling from Jericho, a Jewish city,
yes,
to Jerusalem, obviously a Jewish city.
Yep.
So he's probably a Jew.
Yes.
Okay. And he's traveling, and he gets beset by robbers and thieves, and gets beat up
to die.
Left to die.
And the priest along comes a priest.
Yes, and he walks on the other side of the road saying, "That's not my business.
Not my job. Can't be unclean and go serve in the temple."
Well, that's why I say we know that he's coming from Jericho, probably.
He's going to serve
going to Jerusalem, going to services. He's clean. He's bathed in the water. He's made himself clean, so he can't be bothered to do the right thing.
And then the Levite,
same thing. He's going because he's got a job to do.
He's got a job to do.
He's probably clean.
Yeah. Can't be late.
Can't
they'll fire you if you're late.
Right. Well,
got to show up on time, ready for work every day.
This whole tribe is tasked with taking care of the temple.
Yeah, they got
nothing
all kinds
more,
of work
nothing
to do.
less.
Yeah. And along comes
in the story, it's a Samaritan.
A Samaritan.
Right.
What were they expecting?
They were expecting a Pharisee.
A Pharisee. Now Jesus is just taking it too far.
Yeah, they were. The crowd was astonished.
Yeah, I don't understand what's happening here, but.
Well, I wonder how many people said he's telling the story wrong.
Yeah, this story's wrong. What is happening? They're not going to forget it, though, are they?
No.
Not going to forget it. And we talked about last week, there's a story about a group of slaves who've been conquered, treated poorly,
Yeah.
that were protected and cared for by
The Assyrian king.
Samaritans or
Well,
Sumerians, right?
Sumerians, yeah.
And then they were clothed and taken care of and taken back to, do you remember what city they're taken back to?
Jericho.
To Jericho.
Weren't they part of weren't the Assyrian kings
Yeah,
taking care of them? They clothed them. They gave them
the Sumerians did.
Sumerians, yeah. And they clothed them and they healed their wounds or whatever.
Yeah, poured balm on them.
Yeah, and then took them back to
Jericho.
Jericho, right? Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, that I've heard all my life. Jesus was referencing another story in the Bible.
Exactly.
Man, that'd have been nice to know a few dozen years ago.
So we could contrast and compare.
It's just an intriguing conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Man, it's
it makes you think that is history repeating itself?
Yeah.
In the first is actual happening, and Jesus is reminding them, this is the story I want to tell you.
Yeah. Hey, you remember that guy Oded?
Yeah. Does it sound familiar?
Remember that guy Oded who took those slaves?
Well, it's going to sound familiar to the
Yeah.
people standing around, because we've got all sorts of people groups standing around listening to this Jesus.
And most of them, their life is centered around synagogue, right?
Well, yeah. Well, everybody's life is centered. I mean, where he's speaking, everyone's life is centered around this, because at some point during the year, they probably heard this story again.
See, and I think when Jesus gets done with this story, they're not just astonished, they're confused. I think there's a lot of confusion going on in the crowd. The reason I say that I think there's a lot of confusion going on in the crowd is what comes next in verse 34.
Well, it says, but when the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, they were gathered together. Then one of them asked Jesus another question.
Yeah. What does he ask him?
Master, which is the greatest commandment in the law?
So, see, I think he gets done with this story, and there's a chance they're just confused. It's like, wait. We need to ask this question again. What question are they asking? This is one of the 8 great debates, right?
Yeah.
In their time.
About love or obedience?
Yes. So they're like, wait.
The two yokes, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
With Hillel
yes.
and Shammai.
Yes.
Was this a constant debate between these two sects of the Sadducees?
Yes. So the Pharisees.
So it was a constant debate, because we're right, no, we're more right. You're right,
and here's why we're more right. Yeah.
Well, if that's a great debate, why is it that they never actually
answered? Like come to, because they
feel
like
too stiff-necked to.
Well, in their culture, it's not about the answer; it's about the process. It's about the discovery. It's not about giving you the answer. It's about stirring up a desire in you to pursue the truth.
But if the two groups can't ever come to a commonality, an agreement, then what does it stir up? Does it stir up a longing to understand the love or the obedience, or what?
I think it gives people a place to belong. I mean, I think we see there are a lot of core things that we today, as different denominations and churches, we agree on. But there are certain things that we just have disagreements or differing opinions or differing interpretations and understandings of things.
Right.
And I don't think it makes one necessarily more right than the other. It doesn't make one more sinful than the other. It just creates different spaces for different people to connect in different ways. And so,
well, the reason I ask is I find it interesting that we got to that point last week where Jesus basically is asking who's your neighbor,
yeah,
because love your neighbor as yourself.
yes.
And then he asks again and again and again until he finds that they finally understand because of the story of the Good Samaritan.
Well, and this is my interesting conversation too. Um, they don't ever ask what the second greatest commandment is. They just ask what is the greatest
What's
commandment.
the greatest commandment? Love the
And
Lord
everybody
your God.
agrees on that.
Right.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. The end. I answered your question, but that's the question they asked, but it's not the question they asked. Does that even make sense? That's not their answer they're seeking out. It is the answer to the question that they asked, but it's not the answer that they're asking for.
But like it says here in verse 38.
Yeah.
It says the first and great commandment is.
Yes.
And he tells them, but then he says the second is like unto it.
Yes.
He right away puts this other commandment in there.
Which would be a common refrain. If you asked a Pharisee what was the greatest commandment,
he'd give you the first.
They would give you the first, and they would also give you the 2nd. Mm-hmm. That's the thing I mean, that's what's so interesting to me in this process. They're asking, what's the first and greatest commandment? And everybody's going to answer the first and greatest commandment exactly the same.
Okay.
They're really asking, what's the second greatest commandment? But nobody asks those type of questions, right? Nobody is going to say this. We're in college basketball Final Four time, and I think the semifinals, the Final Four is Saturday, I think, and the championship is Monday.
Right.
Does anybody ask? Like UConn has won it the last 2 years. Okay. Who asked the question? Hey, who was second place in last year's Final Four?
Well, nobody asked that.
Nobody asked that question. They ask who won. And now some people will answer it and say, well, this is who won and this is who they beat. It's just interesting to me that in this culture, it is regular. They're asking for the first and greatest because, like Jesus, or like God said, I am the Lord your God, you'll have no other gods before me. It wasn't like I'm going to be one and then all those other gods are second. He's like, I want to be so much number one. I want to be first by such a wide margin that
you don't even
number two doesn't even matter. Right. And for some reason, they always ask, what's the greatest commandment? And the answer they get is, this is the first and greatest commandment. And then the second one is, it's like, well, nobody asked you for that. You know? But it is what they're asking for. The reality in their culture with the Pharisees, that is the question they're asking. They're really not asking what's the first and greatest commandment because everybody's going to answer the same.
They already know
it. They're asking for clarification based on how he answered the last question. Remind us of what your yoke is again. Remind us what lens you're looking at this through, because we're confused. Because
does that come from those two different groups within the?
Yes. Because they're looking at his priest, Levite, Samaritan conversation going, you said our neighbor, let's talk about this real quick. What's the greatest commandment again? What's your lens? And he says, the second one is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And they're going, but you just told me.
But
in response to the question, right? Who is my neighbor? Isn't that what was asked before?
Yeah.
Who's my neighbor? And he's like, oh, I'll tell you who your neighbor is. It's the Samaritan who does good. And he's like,
what? No, that can't be.
Let me ask you again. What's the greatest commandment? And he says, Greatest commandment is love your Lord your God. To your heart, mind, soul, and strength. The second one is like it.
What they're confused about is the fact that they don't think that the Samaritans should be their neighbor.
Right.
The only neighbors that they have to be Jewish.
That's right.
That's where they're hung up.
So that's why they're asking for clarification. What is your lens? And
well, he comes from the Hillel side.
Yes, he does. He does.
Automatically.
So now, and he goes on to say, on these two commandments hang
all
the law and prophets.
Right.
And so he silenced the Sadducees, and now the Pharisees have taken their swing, and they're like, okay. And so he's got them kind of stuck in a spot where they're having a discussion, and Jesus sees kind of their disorder, and what does he do?
He asks them another question that they're not sure of.
So we're on verse 41 now, right?
Right. While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, saying, what think ye the Christ? Whose son is he?
What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? And naturally, they're going to say what? The Messiah is the son of
David.
Son of David. Because he's a coming king.
Yeah, from the house of David.
From the house of David.
That they all have studied.
To sit on a throne. Yeah, this is David. Son of David. We're looking for someone in the promise of David. And he says to them what?
How then does David in spirit call him Lord, saying, the Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou on my right hand, till I make thine enemies thy footstool.
Yeah. Till I put your enemies under your feet.
Yeah.
So if then David calls him Lord, how is he his son? He just says, that's my question.
And they don't know. No man was able to answer him another word.
They were stuck. They're like, wait, what? And the question is, what's he even asking? Can you interpret this for me? He says, whose son is the Messiah? You're looking for a Messiah, right? You're looking for a character of a person.
That's right, boss. Yeah.
Who's coming in.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be coming.
Going to be the king.
They're going to be the king.
Sitting on the throne.
Sit on the throne of David.
Right. That's what we've been looking for.
Whose son is he?
Well, it has to be, in their thinking, it has to be David.
Has to be David. So then why is it that David, moved by the Spirit, cries out to him and calls him Lord? And they're like, because David calls him God. The Lord said to my Lord. And they're like, what am I supposed to do here?
He's put him on horns of a dilemma again.
He said, so if David calls him Lord, how can he be God to him, but be his son, be his offspring? And they got stuck. And because they couldn't answer him, says, and no one was able to answer him a word. So from that point on, because what was their point at the beginning of this conversation? What did they want to do?
Well, they wanted to trip Jesus up as usual.
They wanted to trip Jesus up. They wanted to discredit him on this Temple Mount, right?
Right.
They wanted to create division between Jesus and all these followers who had a specific understanding, and they wanted to be in control, right?
You're talking about the Pharisees.
The Pharisees and Sadducees, yeah.
They wanted to be able to trip him up, discredit him, and say, okay, we'll have to set him aside because he can't give us the right answer. But he's confused them 3 times now.
So he's parried all of their attacks,
yes.
And as he parries the last one, and they're like, hey, we should really think of something better. This is not going well. And he goes, hey, I've got a question for you. And they're like, oh, this is going to be great. The Christ who you're waiting on, whose son is he? And they're like, well, it's David's, son of David. Don't you know your text? And he was like, yeah, I know my text. Don't you know your text? I think it's like Psalm 110 that you teach in your synagogue. And why then does David call him Lord when he says the Lord crawls out to my Lord? And they're like, I really don't have an answer. And so, since they don't have an answer, they decide, you know what? We should probably give up this business of trying to trick him. It's not working for us. We were trying to discredit him, and we don't have any grounds to discredit him or run him off or run off any of these followers. If anything, we're just helping him along the way.
Well, he's in his time here at the Temple Mount, he has shown them several times that you can't confuse me and you can't separate me from my disciples with your words.
And here's what's interesting. They're like, wow, he has such an understanding of the word and the instruction. It's like, could it be that John chapter 1 is true? That the word became flesh? Maybe.
Well, are they asking this because they don't have that writing? They don't have that writing yet.
No, that's what I'm asking. Like, could it be true?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
If they...
Like, you're not going to trip him up because he is the word.
Right. As he's proven time and time again.
Time and time again. So since they're not going to ask him any more questions, what do you think Jesus does? Goes on about his merry way?
No.
What's he going to do?
Ask him more questions.
So he is going to do something very different from what you and I might do. Go off and celebrate a victory. Be like, hey, did you see how I handed those guys their lunch money? Like, I really took it to them. They were in trouble. No, he doesn't get arrogant or anything like that.
Well, you notice he doesn't go back to the Pharisees. He goes to the people standing.
So he's like, well, if you're going to discredit me, that's fine. That's good. It says in verse 1 of chapter 23, it says, then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, hey, I know you guys aren't going to challenge me anymore, but hey, there's a big group of people here, so I might as well tell them what I know. It would seem that he knows a lot. He knows a lot. So when Jesus said to the crowds and to the disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. What does that mean? Is there a significance to Moses' seat? Is there a specific place that is Moses' seat?
The mercy seat.
Nope, not the mercy seat. In the we did a story, or we did a lesson on synagogue. You remember that?
Yeah, there's a place that the what you call it.
So there's a seat in the synagogue, right?
Right.
Who sits in that seat on Shabbat service?
The high priest.
Nope, not the high priest.
A priest?
Not a priest. A person in the community sits on that seat.
Well, I guess the person that was next in line, because they took turns.
Yes. Each family took turns with readings, right?
Right.
So the person who sat on Moses' seat.
They did it on the daily basis.
Well, they did discuss different stuff in their own home.
Yeah.
But yeah, in Shabbat service, they read out loud. So since it's Moses' seat, where do you think that particular reading comes from? Well, what did Moses give us?
He gave us the law.
The law. So the law of Moses. So the Torah reading, that was read from Moses' seat. And Jesus says to the crowds and the disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. They read the law. He says, so do and observe whatever they tell you. Why would they do and observe? Why would his statement be do and observe whatever these people, Pharisees and Sadducees, did he believe that they were corrupt?
Yes.
Just like everybody else did, right?
Right.
And he says, do and observe whatever they tell you. You mean those corrupt guys are going to tell me what to do?
Well, they had been. Well, they have been for a long time.
He says, do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works that they do. For they preach, but do not practice.
Right. Sounds familiar in today's culture. Rules for me and not for
rules for thee and not for me. Yeah. And they said, Jesus says, I'm gonna take care of this for you. Don't you worry. Those Pharisees and Sadducees, when they come to synagogue with you and they sit in Moses' seat, you better listen to what they have to say. Why would we listen to what they have to say?
Well, they are teaching the law.
They are teaching the law. So
they are telling you what you should do.
Yep.
They are the most learned people.
Yes.
In the crowd. But that's why he says, do what they tell you to do.
But when they read the law and they interpret the law, you do what they say to do. But don't do what they do. And he goes on to say, they tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are willing to move them with their finger. But they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger.
Yeah.
What's he talking about?
They're going to give you the rules.
Yes.
But as heavy as, and I think that all these laws from the Torah, the Mishnah, Talmud, all of those laws are, even they can't bear them.
That's right. They can't do it.
And they've never been able to do it, even though they claim that they live a holy and perfect life.
Right.
So they're saying, Jesus is saying, the burdens that they give to you, they can't even move. So, but you should try. Is he saying you should try and live that way?
I am thinking that he's saying, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger, means this heavy weight that they're putting on you, they could help relieve from you. They're just not willing to do it.
They could help you understand.
They could help you understand how to fight back and how to grow and be better. But
they're not willing to do it.
But they're just not willing to. They're holding on to it.
And I like the next part of this, even though mine has really confusing words.
Says they do all their deeds to be seen by others.
Right.
For they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long, and they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by others. So they enjoy all these things.
Oh yeah, they enjoy the.
So they got extra long tassels. Mm-hmm. So hey, I got my tassels. Don't you worry.
Yeah, and they like the fame.
Their phylacteries are large, long, flowing, making a big scene. They love to sit at the place of honor. Why do they sit at the place of honor?
Because people are sucking up to them.
Because in their culture, the role that they serve is considered the greatest role in the community.
Right, yeah, that's it. Everyone has, at some point in their life, every male wanted to be them.
Yes.
And their parents wanted their children to be them, so they could have a place of honor.
So you get the place of honor at feasts. They get the best seats in the synagogue. They get greeted in the marketplace. And they love being called rabbi by others.
Because teacher was a high honor.
It was. It was. But you are not to be called rabbi. Huh. That seems strange. These people living all of these exaggerations, and they want to be called rabbi and good teacher, and they want to be held close and valued. But doesn't seem like Jesus wants to affirm them. Hey, they want you to call him rabbi, but I'm telling you, you don't call anyone rabbi. And it's like, huh?
That's got to be hard for them to hear.
Why don't you want to call anybody rabbi? Why shouldn't you want to be called rabbi? What does he say? How many teachers do you have?
Me?
Yeah, that's what he asks. He says, but you are not to be called rabbi, for the end of verse
8?
Yeah, middle of verse 8.
For one is your master, even Christ. All your brother. You're all brothers.
For you have one teacher, and you are all brothers.
So does that mean that is Jesus telling them you're all equal? You have one teacher, and the rest of you are equal.
One teacher. Everybody's equal. And you are all brothers. You're co-heirs. But you are not to be called rabbi. For you have one teacher. And you'll not be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And call no man your father on earth. So no rabbi, no father, for you have one Father who is in heaven. Neither be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Christ. Neither be called instructor, for you have one instructor, the Christ. The greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Okay.
That's really got to be confusing to the crowds.
Yeah.
At this point.
Because what's their culture built on? Rabbis and priests and teachers.
Right.
Who do what? Lead people back to
the word, or
yeah,
supposedly
to the law,
right,
to the truth, which isn't that what Jesus said? Hey, those Pharisees and hypocrites, not hypocrites. Those not Pharisees. Yeah, the Pharisees and Sadducees. Those people, they sit on Moses' seat. Do what they tell you to do. And everybody's like, what? But you're like arguing with them. And he says, no, do what they tell you to do because they're teaching you the law. But don't act like them. Don't chase after all these things. Don't chase after all these titles. And he begins this list of woes. What's the first woe? Verse 13 through 15.
Okay, but woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For you neither go into in yourselves, neither. Wait a minute. Read this. New King James is confusing.
But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel across sea and land to make a single proselyte. When he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. What's this woe? What's going on here? Jesus got challenged. Did the challenge stick?
No.
Was he successful at parrying it and turning it around?
Yes.
And they said,
times.
We're not going to bother with him anymore. He's like, don't you worry. I'm still here, though. So he wasn't being bothered, but he was in the mood of doing some bothering, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, he's being critical. He's calling them hypocrites or actors.
Yes. Hypocrite is a big word here because we read this and go, oh, yeah, they say one thing, but they're doing something completely different. But hypokritos
means to be acting.
So they got these big dramatic things. You think that's for the people right here or for the people down there?
Well, the more extravagant they act,
yeah,
the more people see them.
Yes.
Like they're in a big stage and they want to be heard and seen for a great distance around.
Yes.
And they have to act the part. And that's exactly what they do. They act the part.
So that's the question when it really comes down to this thing. What are they acting for? How does this have anything to do with what's going on here? Because there's a lot of people who use this scripture, the way that it's set up right here, and say, see, this is why I am in the liturgical church. And you're like, okay, explain to me. Or this is the reason why I left the liturgical church. And you're like, okay, explain to me. Well, in the liturgical church, everyone is brother and sister so and so, and it's father and son and rabbi and all of these things. They're going to use all these terms, even in I just went blank. He's challenging these people, and he's going to challenge them whether, like, it's not about their position now. These people are trying to make a spectacle. It's not about them saying one thing and doing something different. It's them saying something and then doing it, but not doing it for God. Because what was the first and greatest commandment?
Love the Lord your God.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, right?
Right.
But now they are living that thing out. Like they're obeying the law of God and have the longest tassels and the most colorful phylacteries and are praying on the street corners, shouting out loud on top of a box so they're above everyone else.
They're putting on a good show.
They're putting on a good show. And they're doing it so that they can be noticed. Okay. And that they can be celebrated when they show up at the market. Well, and that they could have the title of rabbi or teacher or father. And there's a lot of people who use this particular sets of verses and go, well, this is why I'm not in the Catholic Church, because it says don't call anybody father, and we call all these people father all the time. Like, you have to earn that title. And it's like, do you though?
Well, he says here you have one Father who is in heaven.
Yes. So should my kids not call me dad? I mean, so what exactly is going on here? What's Jesus doing?
Well, it could be said that he's telling the followers
Yeah.
and his disciples
Yeah.
that these men are, they know the law, they burden you with the law, they
Yes.
give you all this instruction, but they don't follow the law themselves. So you do as they teach you, but not as they do.
Yes.
And he's clarifying a lot of things.
Yeah.
My question though is, a lot of the people that are listening,
Yeah.
don't have access to the
Correct.
writings. They don't have access to the
Yes.
Holy of Holies. They don't have access to a lot of the things that the Pharisees and the Sadducees have.
Yep.
All Jesus is telling them is saying, as you have learned from them,
Yep.
follow that command.
Yep.
You're all brothers. You have one Father in heaven, and that's the one that you should be leaning to
Yes.
for your guidance.
Yeah. And it seems as though if you follow his yoke, that his yoke says, love your God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah. We talk about this all the time, is that if you look to one path, one leader,
Yeah.
that's where your salvation comes from. That's where
Yeah.
all you have to do is look one way. Keep your eye on the prize. Keep your eye on that.
Seems
Continue
like
to believe.
seems like your success rate, your following rate, and your growth rate is going to be very consistent if you just get very disciplined at one thing.
Right.
And that one thing that Jesus says that they should do better than anybody else.
Love the Lord your God.
Love the Lord your God. How am I supposed to do this?
Well,
how am I supposed to love the Lord my God with all my heart, mind, soul, and strength? You think I should just practice the one thing that he tells me to do?
No, but you've got to take that second commandment.
Yes.
Into your daily life at the same time.
There we go.
Otherwise, you'll be very lonely.
Yes. I love the Lord my God. That's cool. How?
By showing myself following the Lord to my neighbor.
Yeah. And so,
the way we practice now is that if you live that life,
yeah,
then you automatically show your neighbor through your life as you live it.
Yeah.
How you take your daily life. If you live it for the Lord,
yeah,
then you're showing your neighbor at the same time.
And Jesus is going to go on to say later that whatever you did to the least of these, did also to me.
Right.
And so he's asking for pursuit.
Right.
He's asking for thoughtfulness. He's asking for surrender. So Jesus is challenging these leaders because they've backed off challenging him, and he's in Holy Week, and now he's going to call on these woes and say, why are you listening to these people? They tell you all of these things, but they don't even understand why. And so,
wait a minute. They understand, but they just don't do.
Correct.
Yeah, they've got
do what they say.
Yeah, they got full understanding of what they're teaching, but they just don't.
Yeah, their practice is not good.
Yeah, well, it's not even a practice.
Yes.
They say, okay, here's the rule, and I'm going to ignore it because I already know it.
Yeah, it's true. So we're going to continue on beyond this next week. I wanted to pause there because there's some things coming up with oaths and swearing and tithing, and we're going to try to finish out all seven of the woes next week, but I just think it's important for us to see what's going on here. Jesus is just a master teacher. He's putting on a master class for them to understand and try to point out, because people are already saying he is the Christ, right? And he's not telling them no, but he's also not flat out saying it. And so we're just going to. Oh, I saw a video. This is what it reminds me of. Go ahead.
Up until this point, he has told several people within the promise,
Yeah.
not to say I'm a Christ.
Yes.
But anybody outside the promise, he said,
Go and tell everybody.
He encouraged them to tell everybody who I am.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
So now he is trying to put them back in the right order and make sure that they're doing things the right way. I saw this video and this man comes and there's three guys standing around this base. It looks like a well. And he looks at him and he says, "Wow, what a structure." They said the other two guys are really proud of themselves. And they're like, "Yes, it's the deepest well we've ever dug." And they've got these plans that they roll out. And he looks at them. He looks down, and he's like, "What's that light down there at the bottom of the hole?" They're like, "We followed the plans. We did exactly what it said." And he looks at the plans and he turns them over and he said, "It's because you're supposed to be building a lighthouse."
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're just dumbfounded. I feel like that's what Jesus is trying to do to these Sadducees and Pharisees. They're like, "You're digging this hole to try to bury people in. And it's supposed to be this safe place, this place of refuge, this place of hope for everybody. It's supposed to be this light for people to come to, and you're making this grave to throw people in."
Yeah, very good analogy. Yeah, I've seen that.
And so, yeah, I just, I don't know. It's like they've got the plans, they just have them upside down.
Yeah.
And Jesus is trying to help them turn them the right way, and they just can't quite understand it.
Yeah.
Can't quite figure it out. So we're going to continue on with these woes and this conversation, this very forward conversation that Jesus is going to have with the Sadducees. He's going to continue to poke the bear. We're going to hear this word hypocrites over and over again. I think it's important. We did touch on this before, but it's important for us to be reminded that's an actor, somebody who's doing it for appearances, not somebody who's.
I've heard teachings before this how on the Temple Mount, these rabbis made a show of everything that they did, because they wanted to be in the spotlight.
Yes.
And we've learned that they are self-serving.
Yes.
They are.
They're title chasing.
Yeah, and they're doing it in order to enrich themselves.
Yes.
In many ways.
Yes.
You don't know that Sadducee may have a pigeon factory at the house, and then he's selling all his pigeons to the
pigeon factory. Yeah. To the temple
for the sacrifice.
Yeah.
If I can raise 100 dove and sell them for one denarii at the temple, then I made my money.
That's right.
Yeah. But we don't,
quite the enterprise.
Of course, Jesus coming into the temple twice.
Yeah.
Tearing it apart, getting rid of the money chain.
Now here we are in his final week, and they still aren't getting it.
Right.
It's a tough spot to be.
Right.
Thanks for joining us.